morning my wife stood up in that courtroom and told the judge I had spent 40 years contributing nothing to our family. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at her. I looked at my hands, these old hands, liver spotted and stiff at the knuckles now. And I thought about my father, who told me once that a man who defends himself to the wrong audience is already losing. I'm 63 years old. I've buried my parents, raised 2 kids, and spent 31 years married to a woman I genuinely loved for most of them. I'm not telling this story to make myself look good. I'm telling it because I need to say it out loud, finally, to someone. Her name is Nadine. We met in the fall of 1993 at a church potluck in Roanoke, Virginia. She was 26. I was 32 and had just come back from a decade working federal asset investigations, first with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, then contracted out to a private firm that did forensic accounting for estate fraud cases. Not glamorous work, mostly paper, mostly silence, but it paid well, and more importantly, I was good at it. Nadine didn't know what I did in any real detail. I told her I worked in finance. She didn't ask much beyond that. I didn't volunteer much beyond that. That was the dynamic from the beginning, honestly. She talked, I listened, and I told myself that was balance. She was magnetic. The kind of woman who walked into a room and rearranged it without touching anything. People leaned toward her. I watched that for 30 years and never stopped being a little amazed by it. We moved to Charlottesville in 1995. Bought a house on a quiet street with old oak trees and a porch I kept meaning to fix. Had our son in 1997. Had our daughter in 2000. Nadine stayed home the first few years, then started doing bookkeeping part-time for a few local businesses. She had a good head for numbers. That should have told me something looking back. Around 2008, my mother's health started declining. She'd had a minor stroke the year before, and while she could still get around, her short-term memory had become unreliable. My father had passed in 2003, and my mother, I'll call her by what I called her, Mom, was living alone in the house they'd shared for 42 years in Harrisonburg. Nadine suggested she sell the house and move closer to us. It seemed like the right thing. Generous, even. My mother trusted Nadine. They'd had a warm relationship for years. Sunday phone calls, birthday cards, all of it. So when Nadine offered to help manage the sale and the transition, my mother agreed without hesitation. I should have been more involved. I know that. I was working a major case that year, a multi-estate fraud situation involving a family trust in Northern Virginia. I was traveling 2 weeks out of every month. I told myself Nadine had it covered. She said she did. My mother moved into an assisted living facility in Waynesboro. Nice place, reasonable monthly cost, around $4,000, which my mother could afford from her savings and Social Security. The house in Harrisonburg sold for $240,000. That money went into an account my mother had held for years, and Nadine helped her set up a secondary account to manage living expenses, she said, so bills could be paid automatically without Mom having to keep track. For 2 years, everything seemed fine. Then in 2010, I got a call from the billing coordinator at the facility. My mother was 2 months behind on payments. I thought it was an administrative error. I called Nadine from the road. She said she'd take care of it. She did. Payments resumed. I didn't look closer. I should have looked closer. By 2012, my mother's primary account had dropped from just over $200,000 to less than $60,000. Her Social Security was still going in every month, around $1,400, but the withdrawals from the secondary account didn't line up with anything I could see. When I asked Nadine about it, she said Mom had some additional expenses, medical equipment, a private aide twice a week, some dental work, reasonable explanations, one at a time, not reasonable added together. But I didn't add them together. Not then. I was tired. I was traveling. I was doing what I'd always done, which was trust that my household was being managed by someone who loved the people in it. My mother passed in the spring of 2014. She was 79. By the time she died, her savings account had just over $12,000 left in it. I told myself she'd spent it on her care. Assisted living adds up. I grieved and moved on. Nadine organized the service. She was gracious and capable, and everyone at the reception told me how lucky I was to have her. The years after that, I can't explain exactly when things shifted between us. There wasn't a single moment. It was more like a season changing. You don't notice the day summer ends. You just realize one morning that it's cold. By 2018, our son had moved to Austin. Our daughter was finishing her master's degree in Portland. Nadine and I were alone in the house, and we were polite to each other, the way neighbors are polite, cordial, surface level, careful. She'd started spending more time with her sister's family in Richmond, long weekends. Then, full weeks. I didn't object. We didn't argue about it. We didn't argue about much by then because we barely spoke. I retired from active casework in 2019, consulting only after that, mostly reviewing documents for a former colleague's firm. It gave me time. Too much time, maybe, to look at things I'd been not looking at for a long time. I found the first discrepancy by accident. I was going through old tax returns. We filed jointly, had always filed jointly, and I noticed a charitable deduction from 2013 that I didn't recognize, a $4,000 donation to an organization I'd never heard of. I Googled it. The organization had no web presence, no IRS 99 filing, nothing. I didn't say anything. I kept looking. Over the next 4 months, working quietly in the evenings while Nadine watched television in the other room or was gone to Richmond, I reconstructed 7 years of our household finances from bank statements, credit card records, and tax documents I requested from the IRS through our joint filing history. I still had the skills. That part never leaves you. What I found was not a bombshell. It was slower than that. It was 100 small things that didn't belong. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Payments to vendors whose names I couldn't verify. Reimbursements to Nadine from my mother's secondary account, the one she'd managed, for expenses that didn't match any receipts in the files I'd kept. Over the course of the years she managed my mother's money, I documented approximately $68,000 that had moved from my mother's accounts in ways that could not be explained by my mother's actual expenses. I sat with that number for a long time. $68,000 from a woman with memory problems who trusted her daughter-in-law with everything. I didn't confront Nadine. I know people wonder about that. Why not just ask her? Because I'd been doing this work long enough to know that confrontation without documentation is just an argument, and arguments don't leave paper trails. I contacted an estate attorney in Richmond, someone I found through a former federal colleague, not through anyone in our social circle. I met with her twice. She told me what I already suspected, what I was describing, if documented accurately, met the threshold for financial elder abuse under Virginia law. It was also potentially actionable as civil fraud given my mother's estate. Then, in March of 2020, right as the pandemic was shutting everything down, Nadine filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences. She said in her filing that I had been emotionally absent for the duration of the marriage, that I had maintained control over household finances in a manner that left her without financial autonomy, and that she was seeking an equitable division of all marital assets, including my pension, my consulting income, and the equity in the house. I read the filing on a Tuesday morning, standing in the kitchen in my bathrobe, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not surprise, something quieter than both of those. Relief, almost. Because now there would be a process, and I trusted the process. I hired an attorney named George Alderman, a retired judge who'd gone back to family law practice in his 60s. Steady, methodical. Didn't say much, which I appreciated. I gave him everything I'd compiled. The spreadsheets, the account records, the documentation of transfers from my mother's funds, the list of unverifiable charitable deductions, all of it. He looked at it for a long time and then said, "This changes the nature of these proceedings considerably." Nadine's attorney filed an emergency motion in May claiming I had hidden assets and was attempting to conceal income. The basis for this claim was that she had discovered I held a professional liability insurance policy through my consulting work that she hadn't known about, and she characterized this as evidence of a broader pattern of financial deception. At the hearing on that motion, Nadine's attorney spoke for 11 minutes about my alleged financial misconduct. He used the words controlling, deceptive, and at one point, financially abusive. Nadine sat beside him in a pale blue blazer and did not look at me once. Then he said it. He said that I had spent 4 decades providing nothing of genuine value to our family, and that Nadine had been the true financial steward of our household, managing accounts, paying bills, maintaining what little stability our family had. I looked at my hands. George leaned over and wrote one word on his yellow legal pad and showed it to me. Soon. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, hair pulled back, reading glasses low on her nose. She'd been listening with her pen resting on the bench, not writing. When Nadine's attorney finished, she looked up. She didn't look at me. She looked at him. "Counsel," she said, "I've reviewed the respondent's preliminary financial disclosure and supporting documentation. Before we go further, I want to make sure I understand your client's characterization of Mr. She glanced at her papers. "Of your opposing party. Your client is alleging he concealed finances and failed to contribute meaningfully to the household?" Nadine's attorney said yes, that was correct. The judge removed her glasses. "Are you aware," she said, "of your opposing party's professional background?" There was a pause, a real pause, the kind that has texture. "We're aware he worked in finance," the attorney said. "He worked for 11 years with IRS criminal investigation and subsequently as a forensic accountant specializing in estate fraud detection," the judge said. "I want to make sure that's part of the record before we continue because it is relevant to how I'm evaluating the documentation submitted by both parties." She put her glasses back on. "Your client may wish to revisit her characterization." Nadine's attorney looked at his client. Nadine's face did something I hadn't seen it do in a long time. It went very still. The hearing continued for another 2 hours. What emerged, slowly and procedurally, the way these things do, was that the financial documentation I had compiled painted a picture that was incompatible with Nadine's claims of my financial misconduct. It also raised questions, which George raised carefully, methodically, about the management of funds belonging to my mother's estate during the years Nadine had served as the de facto account manager. The motion to compel disclosure of hidden assets was denied. The judge ordered a forensic accounting review of both parties' financial histories going back to 2008. I won't pretend the months that followed were easy. Divorce proceedings during a pandemic, a forensic review of 12 years of household finances, my daughter calling me from Portland to tell me she thought I was the one being unreasonable. That was a hard phone call. I didn't defend myself. I told her I understood why she felt that way and that I hoped someday she'd have more information. She hung up on me. My son called 2 weeks later. He'd been talking to his sister, he said, but he'd also been looking at some things. He asked if I could walk him through the timeline. I did. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know." That phone call held me together through a lot of what came after. The forensic review was completed in early 2021. The findings were detailed and dry and entirely devastating to Nadine's position. The reviewer identified $71,400 in transfers from my mother's managed accounts that could not be attributed to documented care expenses. She also identified consistent patterns of income underreporting on Nadine's bookkeeping business, money that had passed through accounts in Nadine's name that had not been included in our joint returns. Nadine's attorney withdrew from the case in February 2021. She retained new counsel. The divorce was finalized in September of that year. I kept the house. My pension was protected in full. Nadine was required to make restitution to my mother's estate. My mother's remaining assets had passed to me and my sister upon her death in the amount of $58,000, reduced from the full documented amount through negotiated settlement. The IRS matter is ongoing. That's all I'll say about that. My daughter came to Charlottesville in October 2021. We sat on the porch, the one I'd finally fixed, during the long, quiet months of the pandemic, and she read through a summary of the forensic review. She didn't say much for a while. Then she said she was sorry for the things she'd said. I told her she had believed what she was told by someone she loved, and that wasn't something to be ashamed of. She cried. I didn't. I was all out of that by then. I'm not writing this to say I was a perfect husband. I wasn't present enough. I let too much go unexamined because examination felt like conflict, and I'd had enough conflict at work. My mother deserved better protection from me than I gave her. Those things are true, but I know what I contributed to that family. I know what I built and what I protected and what I set aside so my kids could have what they needed. And I know that silence is not the same as absence, even if it looks that way from the outside. The oak trees on my street have dropped their leaves. The porch is solid now. New boards, fresh paint holds up fine. I have coffee out there most mornings, just me and the neighborhood coming awake. I'm 63 years old. My hands are stiff in the morning. I still know how to read a financial document. And I know this, paper remembers everything. Every transfer, every account number, every date. Paper doesn't get tired. Paper doesn't second-guess itself. Paper just holds what happened and waits. I waited too. And in the end, that was enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. Not just the divorce, not just the courtroom, all of it, going back 30 years. And the thing I keep coming back to is this: actions compound. The same way interest compounds in an account, so do choices. Every small thing a person does or doesn't do builds on the last one. Nadine made 100 small choices over many years, each one easy to justify in the moment, each one slightly worse than the one before it. And I made my own 100 choices: to look away, to trust without verifying, to stay quiet when I should have been paying closer attention. Neither of us woke up one morning and decided how our lives would turn out. We arrived there one quiet decision at a time. That's what I think about when people ask me whether I'm angry. Anger would require me to pretend I played no part in any of it. I wasn't naive, exactly. I knew what financial fraud looked like in the abstract, in other people's lives, in case files. But I applied none of that knowledge to my own home, because home was supposed to be the place where I didn't have to think that way. That was a choice, my choice, and my mother paid part of the price for it. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because I think the only honest thing a person can do after something like this is look at it straight. Not to wallow, not to perform regret, just to actually see it. Integrity isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you practice. And sometimes you practice it badly, and then you have to decide whether you're willing to do better. What I know now, at 63, is that intelligence without honesty is just a sharper tool for making the same mistakes. I was good at my work. I understood financial systems, paper trails, the architecture of deception, and I still let things happen under my own roof that I would have caught in 5 minutes in a professional context. That gap between what I knew and what I was willing to see, that's where the damage lived. The courtroom moment people ask me about, when the judge asked George's question and the attorney had no answer, that wasn't my victory. That was just the truth finally taking up the space it had always deserved. Truth doesn't need you to fight for it every single day. It just needs you to not bury it. Keep the records. Don't throw away the documents. Don't let someone else rewrite the story of your own life because you're too tired or too polite to hold on to your own version. My son Tyler called me last Thanksgiving from Austin. He said something that I've thought about nearly every day since. He said, "Dad, I think the quietest people in a room are usually the ones who understand it the best. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I know that patience, real patience, the kind that comes from actually understanding a situation and choosing your moment, that's not weakness. That's one of the harder things a person can build in themselves, and most people never do. I'm still here. Porch is solid. Coffee's hot. That's enough.